July 15, 1978, Birmingham, Alabama. The summer air was thick with humidity and tension. Bob Marley wasn't supposed to be in Alabama that night. His tour bus had broken down 50 miles outside the city, forcing him and his small entourage to seek shelter in the only place that would accept them, a modest boarding house in a predominantly white neighborhood. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, was a 67-year-old widow who didn't care about the color of a man's skin when he needed help. But her neighbors. That was a different story entirely. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Bob Marley, the Jamaican Rastafarian who preached unity and love, was sleeping 3 blocks away from the local KKK chapter's meeting hall. What happened next would become one of the most extraordinary nights in music history. But before we get to that moment, you need to understand what Bob was walking into. Because this wasn't just about music. This was about everything that America was still struggling to overcome in 1978. By 8 p.m., cars began circling the boarding house. Pickup trucks with Confederate flag bumper stickers. Sedans filled with men whose faces Bob couldn't see in the darkness. Mrs. Patterson noticed first, peeking through her curtains as headlights swept across her front yard again and again. "Mr. Marley," she whispered, knocking softly on his door. "I think we might have some trouble brewing." Bob opened the door, still wearing his simple white shirt and dark pants. His dreadlocks were tied back, and despite the obvious tension, his eyes remained calm. This wasn't his first encounter with hatred. Growing up in Trenchtown, facing poverty and violence, had taught him that fear only made dangerous situations worse. "How many?" Bob asked quietly. "Maybe 15, 20 cars. They're not being subtle about it." Through the thin walls, they could hear engines idling, car doors slamming, and voices, angry voices, growing louder as more vehicles arrived. Bob's band members, who had been resting in adjacent rooms, gathered in the narrow hallway. Junior Marvin, his guitarist, looked nervous. "Bob, man, we should call the police." But Bob knew better. In 1978 Alabama, the police weren't always interested in protecting people who looked like him. Sometimes they were part of the problem. "No," Bob said quietly. "This is something different. Something we need to handle differently." Mrs. Patterson's hands trembled as she pulled the curtains shut. "They've got signs," she whispered. "Confederate flags. And something else I can't make out from here." By 9:30 p.m., the situation had escalated. The cars had stopped circling. Now they were parked in a loose semicircle around the boarding house, headlights aimed at the front windows like spotlights. The voices outside had grown more organized, more purposeful. Bob could make out chanting now. Words he'd heard before. Words that were designed to intimidate, to terrorize. But something interesting was happening inside him. Instead of fear, he felt something else entirely. Sadness. These men outside, filled with such hatred, Bob couldn't help but wonder what pain had twisted them into this shape. "Mr. Marley," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a back door. You and your people could slip out, make it to the next county before—" "No," Bob said, and this time his voice carried a quiet authority that filled the small room. "Running away doesn't solve anything. It just moves the problem somewhere else." At exactly 10 p.m., the chanting stopped. In the sudden silence, they could hear footsteps on gravel, men organizing themselves. Then came the knocking. No, not knocking. Pounding, fists against wood, demanding entry. "We know you're in there," a voice shouted from outside. "Come out and face what's coming to you." Bob walked to the front window and slowly pulled back the curtain. Outside, he could see them clearly now. Maybe 25 men, some in white robes, others in regular clothes but carrying torches. Their leader, a tall man with a gray beard, stood directly in front of the door. What happened next shocked everyone in that house, including Bob's own band members. Bob Marley unlocked the front door and stepped outside. The men outside fell silent, clearly not expecting their target to simply present himself. Bob walked slowly down the front steps, his hands visible and empty, and stopped about 10 feet from the group's leader. "Good evening," Bob said, his Jamaican accent unmistakable in the humid Alabama night. "I'm Bob Marley. I believe you gentlemen came here to see me." The leader, a man named Clayton Russell who owned a local hardware store and had led the Birmingham KKK chapter for 8 years, stared at Bob with undisguised hatred. But there was something else in his expression, too. Confusion. This wasn't how these encounters usually went. "You're on the wrong side of town, boy," Russell said, his voice carrying the practiced menace of someone accustomed to intimidating others. Bob nodded slowly. "You're probably right about that. My bus broke down. Mrs. Patterson was kind enough to offer shelter. But tell me something, Mr. Russell, Clayton Russell. Mr. Russell, you came all the way out here on a Tuesday night, brought all these men with you. That's a lot of effort, a lot of people's time. Can I ask you why?" Russell's jaw tightened. This conversation wasn't going the way he'd planned either. "Because you people don't belong here. This is a good neighborhood, Christian neighborhood. We don't need your drugs and your whatever it is you call that music." Bob listened carefully, then asked a question that would change everything. "Mr. Russell, do you have children?" The question caught Russell off guard. "What? Children? Sons? Daughters? Do you have a family?" Russell hesitated, clearly trying to figure out where this was going. "2 daughters. What's that got to do with anything? What do you want for them? For their future?" "I want them to grow up safe, in a world where they don't have to worry about." Russell caught himself, realizing he was about to reveal more than he intended. Bob nodded again. "You want them to be happy, to live without fear, to know love." He paused, letting those words settle. "Mr. Russell, that's exactly what I want too. For my children. For your children. For every child." The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't the confrontation they'd come for. Bob continued, his voice gentle but clear. "I grew up poor, Mr. Russell, hungry most days. My father left when I was young. I know what it's like to feel angry, to feel like the world has been unfair to you." Russell's grip on his torch tightened. "You don't know anything about my life." "You're right. But I know something about anger. I know what it feels like to want to blame someone else for the pain you're carrying." The silence stretched between them. Behind Russell, some of the men were shifting uncomfortably. "But here's what I learned," Bob continued. "Anger is like a fire. You can use it to destroy things, burn everything down. Or you can use it to light the way forward, to create something better." Russell stared at Bob for a long moment. "You think you can just come here and talk your way out of this?" Bob shook his head. "I'm not trying to talk my way out of anything, Mr. Russell. I'm trying to talk my way into something, into understanding, into peace." That's when Bob did something that nobody, not his band members, not Mrs. Patterson, not the KKK members, expected. He began to sing, not loudly, not as a performance, almost like a prayer. "One love, one heart. Let's get together and feel all right." His voice carried across the yard, soft and pure in the night air. Russell raised his hand, clearly intending to stop him, but something in Bob's voice made him freeze. "Hear the children crying, one love. Hear the children crying, one heart." One by one, the torches began to lower. The angry murmurs faded into silence. Bob kept singing, his eyes never leaving Russell's face. "Let's get together and feel all right." That's when something extraordinary happened. Russell, the man who had led a hate group for 8 years, began to cry. It started as just a few tears, barely visible in the flickering light. But then his shoulders began to shake. The torch fell from his hands as he covered his face. "I'm tired," Russell whispered. "God help me. I'm so tired of being angry all the time." Bob stepped closer, slowly, and placed a gentle hand on Russell's shoulder. Then maybe it's time to put that anger down, brother. The word brother seemed to break something open in Russell. He looked up at Bob, his face wet with tears. How can you call me that? After what I came here to do? Because that's what you are, Bob said simply. We all are. All of us children of the same Father, walking the same earth, breathing the same air. Russell stared at Bob for what felt like an eternity. Then he did something that would be talked about in Birmingham for decades. He stepped forward and embraced Bob Marley. The crowd of KKK members stood in stunned silence as their leader hugged the man they had come to terrorize. I'm sorry, Russell whispered. I'm so sorry. Bob held him for a moment, then stepped back. Mr. Russell, would you like to hear another song? Russell nodded, unable to speak. Bob began singing Three Little Birds. This time his voice was stronger, more confident. Don't worry about a thing, 'cause every little thing gonna be all right. As he sang, something magical began to happen. One by one, the men who had come with hate in their hearts began to lower their weapons, extinguish their torches. Some began to hum along, others just listened, many wiping away tears they hadn't expected to shed. When the song ended, Russell turned to his followers. Go home, he said quietly. Just go home. It's over. Most of the men began to disperse, but several lingered. A young man named Tommy, Russell's lieutenant, approached Bob nervously. Mr. Marley, he said, his voice shaking. This isn't how I thought tonight would go. Bob smiled at him. How did you think it would go? Tommy couldn't answer. The hatred that had brought him here felt foreign now, like a coat that no longer fit. Would you like to sit and talk? Bob offered. All of you? And they did. For the next 3 hours, Bob Marley sat on Mrs. Patterson's front porch with former KKK members, talking about life, about pain, about the possibility of change. He shared stories from Jamaica, from his childhood, from his journey to understanding that love was stronger than hate. Russell talked about his own childhood, about a father who had filled him with rage, about the fear that had driven him to seek power through intimidation. As dawn began to break over Birmingham, Bob suggested they sing together one more time. One Love echoed through the quiet neighborhood as the sun painted the sky pink and gold. Before they left, Russell made Bob a promise. I can't undo the things I've done, the hate I've spread, but I can stop spreading it. True to his word, Clayton Russell disbanded the Birmingham KKK chapter the following week. He spent the remaining 20 years of his life working with civil rights organizations, trying to heal the wounds his hatred had created. Tommy, the young lieutenant, moved to Jamaica 2 years later, where he worked on a youth outreach program funded by the Marley Foundation. Mrs. Patterson framed a photo that one of the band members took that night. Bob Marley sitting on her porch, surrounded by former hate group members, all of them singing together. She kept it on her mantle until the day she died. Bob never spoke publicly about that night. When asked in interviews about confronting racism, he would simply say, "Love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend." But 30 years later, in 2008, Clayton Russell's daughter Sarah, one of the children he had mentioned that night, became the first black principal in Birmingham's school district. At her appointment ceremony, she played a recording of One Love and dedicated her new position to the man who taught my father that love could conquer hate. The boarding house still stands today. There's a small plaque by the front door that reads, "On July 15, 1978, Bob Marley proved that music can change hearts, one love at a time." If this incredible story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that love is stronger than hate. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's kindness changed your perspective completely? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the power of music to heal our world.